Okay, welcome everyone. I'm just gonna do what I always do at the beginning of these conversations, and is just make sure it's streaming to the right places. So I'm pretty sure it is, but I'd like to see comments if they come in. So here we go. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And I'm here with Sara Rauch, and she is a friend from my MFA days, which I realized, Sarah, like I started a decade ago, which
Yeah.
which is like anyway, time. And Sarah and I actually were in the same workshop I think it was my second workshop, or I can't remember, but it was the best one
With
I
Jack,
had with Jack and Laura.
Lori. Yeah, Laura.
And anyway, I love Sarah's writing so much. I remember before what shines from it. Is that
Mhm.
a title? Okay.
Yep.
Before that came out, there was an essay that you wrote that was in Hobart,
Yes,
and I think it was like the seed for maybe this
it
story, this
was.
this book. And I was just like, I think I thought about it for weeks after. I was just so blown away by the poetry and poignancy and potency of it. It was just so powerful. And so, I loved, of course, your collection of stories. And Sarah and I had collections coming out around the same time, and we swapped, and it was so good and juicy to read those stories. And then I don't know, Sarah, because I know you're not on social media, how I saw that you had this book coming out, and I remembered the Hobart essay, and I was like, I ordered it right away. And I just it's a stunning piece of work. It really is a stunning piece of work, and I highly recommend it to everyone. But it's a challenging story. So it's a story about, well, do you want to say? Because you probably have it down, you know,
Yeah, no,
and
I mean, I don't know if I have the elevator pitch down, down, even though now the book's been out for almost a year. It's a book about infidelity, I guess bisexual infidelity. It's a book about God. It's a book about uh, life starting over, transformation. Did that cover? That's all the big themes, I guess.
sure,
Maybe there's
yeah.
a little family in there for good measure.
Yeah, a
Relationship,
bear and some
bears and
spiders.
spiders. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that's so beautiful about the book, so there is, there is this story of longing. I felt like, with the infidelity, the narrator, the you, is in a committed relationship with another woman, and that relationship is like the commitment feels a little slippery
Yeah.
and maybe more one-sided or something. And then along comes this, you're at this residency, which is familiar to me, and there's this longing that begins with this married man, and the correspondence. So I felt more than like infidelity and that kind of tropey story. Um, I really felt the longing and the beauty in that part of the story. And and the way that you weave in the spiders and the bears and the weather even, there's all these pieces that you bring together that are so, I think if you just told the story, it wouldn't have the same impact as with the poetry of other people's works and thoughts and meditation. And maybe you can speak to the construction, the building of the story, and then we'll get to the courage of the story.
Yeah. Well, when I tried to write this book for a long time, and that Hobart essay came out in 2015, which was, I think, maybe less than a year after the affair had ended and my relationship had ended. Um, and I think I wanted, like, I was like going to just get it out. I was going to write this little essay and I was going to move on. And then I found I couldn't. And so I kept writing kind of towards it, always essays. It always felt very fragmented, everything I was writing. Um, and then kind of a few years passed. I had a fiction book come out and get published, and I think I was really still thinking like I'm a fiction writer. I'm going to keep writing fiction. And then when we were in lockdown for the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to write this whole story out. For some reason, I cannot let go of this story of this relationship and this affair and the aftermath. And so I'm just going to write it down. I'm going to get it out. I'm going to like get this big boulder out of my pathway, my writing pathway, and I'm going to just like keep going, you know, write a novel or something. So I started writing mostly about the affair. And I was kind of like in that. And then I started to think like, well, wait, this affair doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense without some of these other scenes, without like knowing who I was before the affair started and who I was after the affair ended. And so it became this kind of bigger narrative. And I think while I was doing that, I realized a couple things, which one of which was like, oh, this is a book. I'm writing a book. I don't know if I'll ever publish it, but I'm actually writing a book here. And I also realized that I did have a straightforward narrative, and that was important to me. There was this kind of propulsive narrative of things happening and people interacting and kind of this driving forward force. But on the whole, the idea of just telling an affair narrative or a relationship falling apart narrative, those things are interesting to me, but they're not that interesting to me. So I was like, how else do I make this interesting? And so as I was thinking about that, I kind of returned to my essayistic tendencies and I started breaking up the kind of overarching narrative with these little asides. So I might talk about tarot, or I might talk about spiders, or like this bear showed up in my backyard one day and I was like, oh, the bear is totally part of this narrative. And there were actually all these other things in my past related to bears that really fit. And I was like, oh, okay. So I really felt like I was kind of piecing together and kind of creating not only a narrative arc, but like a narrative world. And as
Mm.
part of that narrative world, there were all these really cool, interesting things around me that I could like pull in and kind of support the narrative with.
I love that, the narrative world. And I love this idea of like, it really is the puzzling. When we are presented with a story, there's a puzzle we have to solve. And if we kind of allow it, like cast our net, if that's what I'm seeing, or our web,
Yeah.
and we sort of like have to, maybe we can speak to this and it may sound a little woo-woo to people, but like opening up to receiving different
Mm,
kind of ideas and ways to, or things to include in your narrative.
mm. Yeah. You know, I think about that a lot because I think this book especially is extremely personal, but even the fiction I write is very personal. So a lot of the times when I sit down to write, it feels kind of like I'm tuning into some piece that's inside me.
Hmm.
But then there are other times when I sit down to write where and this is very woo-woo, so, but I think most people who are kind of in the creative fields kind of understand this impulse or whatever it is. I also feel like sometimes I sit down to write and I'm actually channeling from I have no idea where down through myself to the page. So it really is this kind of interplay between the
I'm just
heart
going
and what's inside and then like
yeah.
what's coming out of the ether and funneling down through me. So it's this dynamic interplay of worlds, I guess.
Yes, I love that. And so like it's almost like we have to cast a spell. Like
Mm,
like when we decide to write a story, I don't know if that's true for you, but like that you that you do kind of put it out and pull it back in. If that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, you as the writer kind of have to fall under your story's spell, but you also have to
Oh,
cast the
yeah.
story's spell. So you're both, you know, you're both
Yeah.
making the spell happen, but then also falling enchanted by it.
No wonder it's so hard.
Yeah.
So you write about this this affair and and this person you've had the affair with has like a life and you know a marriage and whatever. So how do you decide what is your story to tell and how to tell it when it involves somebody else? Like there's some courage there without throwing them completely under the bus, I guess.
Yeah. Um, well, I should say, when I was first writing this book, I was not thinking I was going to publish it.
Yes.
So, or if I was like, maybe in the back of my head, I was like, maybe I'll publish this, but things will change if I publish it. So I was able to kind of get into like the true heart of it because I wasn't thinking about a public audience. Um, Once I got the book under contract and was like, oh, okay, this actually is going to exist in the world. How's this gonna work? I went back in and I took out the things that I thought would be too identifying, even like really tangentially, and I took out those markers. And then I I did think a lot about what this would mean to be in the world and how this could potentially impact the person I had the affair with, my ex partner, my family, my current family. And ultimately, I thought, this is poetic enough and kind of it's hyper personal, but it's also like it's art. And that was
Yes.
how I was able to kind of make it okay with myself that I was doing this. It was like I was never out to throw anyone under the bus. I was never out to hurt anyone. If I wanted to hurt people, I could have done it back in, I had
Yes.
no intention of hurting or upsetting anyone. I wanted to create something beautiful. And so that's how I was able to make peace with what I had done. Is that it was, yes, it's very personal, but it's also art. It is meant to be
Yes.
consumed.
I love that you've said that, Sarah, because what I know that so many people kind of run into that block of like being afraid to um, to expose someone, say, but then they don't write at all,
Mm.
or that freezes the process. And so I think that process of just allowing and then reevaluating once you know it's going to go out into the world of how to, make it artful. And one
Mm.
of the ways I think you've done that is that it's an incredibly, like you say, it's very personal, but it's very much an inward journey.
Mm.
Like there are, yes, these other players, but really it feels like to me that the inquiry is into your own um process of like how this happened and why this happened and what it turned out for you or um how it impacted you on a deep level.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it is, yeah, there are definitely other people in the narrative, but it's fully my narrative. And I take full ownership over that. And I think that's part of I think I struggle with it a little bit on the page in the book, in that it's like, what is truth? Like, how do we ever decide what's true and what's not? I mean, obviously truth is different than facts. So there's that. I kind of struggled with that a little, not struggled, but like I thought about it a lot. And I thought about like what is true in the creative urge versus what is true in real time. And then also, when you're writing about the past, you're writing through a kind of lens of memory, and those memories are true, but your memory's constantly rewriting itself. And so by the
Yeah.
time I got to writing this book, 6 years after the fact, and I'd been thinking about this stuff for over the course of 6 years, yes, those memories are still very true. They're still very emotionally resonant to me, but they're just my memories, and it's just
Hmm.
my psychology. And so I think that definitely helped kind of guide the narrative also.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And so valuable for people to, I think, hear is like, yeah, that we are working with memory and memory isn't accurate and it is only one story. And so but there is a kind of courage to tell that truth of
Mm.
your experience, right? Do you want to speak to that at all? And like, I mean, I know that I'm always seeking that as a writer. I want to
Mm.
speak what is true. And sometimes I do get confused in terms of what is true and does this make this person look,
Mm.
you know, I'm
Yeah.
not usually too scared to throw people under the bus, but
Yeah, I mean, I think probably that courage and came from the uh, that sense that you just talked about, that this is a very inward journey.
mhm.
At no point in this book do I look good. Like no
Yeah.
decision I made was a good one. I mean, good, bad, whatever. I'm not to be on this binary, but like I did not set out to write a book where I like have this miraculous journey and I look great and everyone else was screwing up. I was screwing up. Like this is a book about human beings screwing up, and pretty much everyone is screwing up, but me
Yeah.
most of all.
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
like
That's
that's where the courage came from. It was like this is coming out of like the messiest, most honest part of being human,
mhm.
and that's why I think partly it felt so important to me to write.
I I love that you say that. It's so funny. I remember someone saying of my book, like, none of the characters are likable. And I was like, oh, really? But I just because it was so, I aim for that honesty. And when you get into the psychology of someone, it's a mess. Like there's no kind of just valor going forward that there is a lot of confusion and there is a lot of, you know, choices that are hurtful or suffering, like there's all these pieces that are just
Yeah.
the
And I
messy
think,
human experience.
yeah, depending on what you're writing, it's you don't want it's not meant to be easy, and this
No.
book especially is not meant to be easy. It's not meant to have easy answers. It's not meant to draw easy conclusions. It's not meant to be even easy to read. Like I think, I mean, I hope it's easy to read and that it's enjoyable and you can turn the pages and that, but like it's the themes and the ideas are not meant to be easy. And I think that's part of why I was drawn to the essayistic form.
Hmm.
Essayistic form kind of complicates things. It's
Yes.
not straightforward. It really is taking in all these different aspects and kind of forcing us to look at things in ways or from angles that we might not normally look at them. So,
Absolutely. Like it is kind of confronting, like you can, have had some sort of experience of betrayal or infidelity in your own life, and then she says, as though it hasn't happened to her. And so, and then read your book and like, think about have an opinion and then read
mhm,
your book and like it just breaks down the opinion. It doesn't mean that there's one right way or that the pain isn't real, but there's a kind of I guess that's what I want to say. It's like it's confronting. As a reader, it actually is confronting to what you believe. And I think that's the value of the creative nonfiction form and the essay. And, if I just agreed with everything or I didn't, that would be really easy.
hmm, yes,
But
yeah.
as a reader, I was like, there was some disquiet in my own
Mhm.
psyche and disquiet in my own heart as I was reading it, and I really appreciated it.
Mhm.
So nice work.
Good, good. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly that. That's what I want. I want my
Yes.
readers to be engaged and to be thinking and to be challenged and to really resonate with some things and have other things be like, oh, this is hard for me to take, but I want to keep going. I want to find out where this
Hmm.
where this is going to go. So,
Yeah, that's really, and that's a kind of courageous act too. Like, never mind the story, but the act of creating something that does have that dis-ease to it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, for my first book, every time I go on Goodreads, I'm like, oh, look at all these cute, sweet reviews. And now for this book, every time I go on Goodreads, I'm like, oh God, what am I gonna find from one of these people who like absolutely hate my book and me? Like,
Oh yeah. Oh God.
a very, very different experience.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Not all of the reviews, obviously, but man, there have been more than I may have thought that I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was gonna like really bring out some things in people I probably should have realized, knowing what I was writing about and knowing that I'm writing about a very divisive, many very divisive topics here. But it's been interesting.
Well, you've done a good job then stirring the pot. Like, I think that's probably good that you went into it not knowing and not assuming. Like, I would hate for that to have gotten in the way of your creative process in terms of putting this book out because it is
Mhm.
so beautiful. And yeah, it's just like those things in terms of if we were speaking to this community is that can shut you down. I had a student say she was reading some comments in the Washington Post about what readers like to read and don't like to read. And she felt really frozen then in her own process because people were saying, oh, if it's in first person, and like, it's like, my God,
Yeah.
you cannot orient your process around the comments in the Washington Post or anywhere.
Oh
But
man. I don't
yeah.
know if you remember John McNally's craft talk, or I think it was a craft talk. It might have been my final Seaside residency, so it would have been your third. Anyway, it was
Mhm.
talking about you never write towards the audience because you'll always fail. And I found that, I mean, maybe not while I was writing this book, but afterwards I was like, that is one of the best pieces of advice I think I've ever received, is like,
Mm,
and not right. I mean, if you can get that idea that someone is going to read this book someday, if you can get that entirely out of your head, like it doesn't even exist for you, what comes out will be much more honest. And I think the more honest your writing is, the better it is.
yeah. And I think that's, we were talking about Melissa Fabos at the beginning in terms of, and for those of you who don't know Melissa Fabos, she is a writer and she has a book that Sarah and I were talking about called Body Work. And she kind of speaks to, which I think is really important, and one of the things I believe is the power of narrative, like of stories outside the ones we are usually served
Mm,
up, and
yeah.
the importance of that truth. And so, if we are worried about like the comments, the negative comments on Goodread or what have you, then that truth, can't do its work, which it really does. We do need that in this world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So we're just gonna maybe take a couple of minutes here and and talk about sex because we can't talk about forbidden love without talking about sex. And the reason I bring it up is because it's challenging to write about sex and it's challenging to do it well and do it without falling into tropes. It's
Mm.
challenging to do it honestly. And I'm curious about your process writing about sex because there's a couple of really beautiful, sex scenes in here. Maybe only one really, really that I remember, but um, can you talk about that and how you go into writing about sex and you write about sex in your fiction as well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I I don't know if I have any craft advice. It comes
No, I know, but
from an
uh,
entirely personal
well,
place.
well,
I think,
can I just interrupt for a second? Well, I think
yeah.
one of the common craft advice pieces out there is to skip over the sex
Mm,
and write about right after. And what
yeah.
that does is it like takes away our bodily experience of living in
Mm.
these, in these bodies that do have sex. And so that is one piece of advice out there, which I don't think is very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's definitely not helpful. I mean, on some
I mean, it's
level,
easier.
it's definitely easier to just avoid it altogether. But yeah, I mean, especially particularly for this book, it's a book all about like being in your body and kind of trusting your animal body and your instincts.
Mhm.
It would be, and it's about a long-term relationship and an affair. It would be weird if sex never came up, right?
Totally.
Um, but I think, I mean, I guess what I try to do is stay as poetic and as bodily as I could without getting into like the mechanics or the nitty gritty or trying to describe anything. I mean, essentially, I was trying to, without leaving the body entirely, trying to get into this idea of the emotionality of the act.
Mm,
I think that fit for this book because that's what the book was kind of driving at and sort of trying to understand is like one's emotional life and how one kind of processes things. Um, I mean, I think the other thing about this affair was that it was primarily emotional. There was some
yes.
physical intimacy, but it was for the bulk of the time that it was happening, it was emotional. Like there wasn't a lot of physical proximity. So I think maybe that could be kind of a lead in for understanding how to approach the actual physical because like all that longing was kind of built apart and then you can kind of bring those you're only really seeing my side of it but you can bring those two longings together and I just it fits with this book and every book is different of course but I think like I aired very much on the like poetic and kind of I want to say abstract, but I don't know if that's
Mhm.
entirely the right word. Um, I didn't want to shy away from it because it was an important, pun not intended, climactic event in the story. So I could not write it. But I definitely kind of like stayed, I don't know, like
Yeah.
maybe kind of abstractly around it.
But the body isn't abstract. So I think that
Yeah.
what you're saying about the embodied experience without getting mechanical is perhaps what we can consider.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe a prompt for all of you out there watching this would be to write a sex scene that focuses on the body and not and the long and the emotionality and not the mechanics. And see what happens. And see what happens. Like truly, it is an art to write about sex well.
Yeah.
And even if the sex isn't good, to write about it well is important because
Yeah.
there's all kinds of sex out there,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
obviously.
kind of getting at the feeling underneath it, right? Because if it's
Yeah.
good, it's one feeling. If it's not good, it's another feeling.
Yeah.
If it's, there's all different levels from like bliss down to like,
Yes. Yes.
so like
Yeah.
which emotion is being felt on any of those levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe everybody could try different registers of like the bad sex and the blissful that they've had. Okay, well, on that sexy note, we're gonna say goodbye and sign off. But what I'd love to do, Sarah, is to share with people your website and also where they could buy your book. So if you can give me those coordinates, that would be awesome, and I will pass it on to everyone who's watching. So thank you for being here, Sarah,
Thank you for having me.
and thank you everyone for tuning in to this beautiful conversation about love and sex and art.